Welcome to the Time Management Podcast with me, your host, Abigail Barnes. I'm a productivity coach, global speaker, time management author, and award-winning entrepreneur on a mission to share the 888 formula with the world and to remind you that it's your time. Leave it to me to bring you new time management tips, tricks, tools, and strategies, to introduce you to guests, research, and case studies from around the world, and to give you a simple 5-step process you can follow to uplevel your productivity, achieve your goals, and create a life that exceeds your wildest dreams. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Welcome to the show. I am so excited today to bring you the incredible Sal Jeffries. Sal, welcome to the show.
Oh, what a lovely intro. Thank you so much, Abigail. I'm delighted to be here and have a nice conversation with you.
Let's dive straight in. Who is Sal Jeffries in a nutshell?
I'm someone who spends my time coaching founders and people who are normally over 40 through periods of change in their thinking, their life, and their business.
What was your relationship with time like in the early years?
It's quite an intriguing question because I've been around the block a long time now. I've got the lines to prove it and less hair. So I've been alive for a long time. Being young, I remember time when I was very young was this malleable thing. There's this playful quality to being a child. I was very imaginative. I could augment scenes. So if I was out playing on my bicycle, I could see scenes of, magic or spaceships. I could just augment. The child's mind is wonderfully powerful. And the sense of that time being expansive when I was playing was very profound. I can tune into that now. And then, of course, I remember the enforced time of school, and then the things you didn't want to do, and that time feeling like it wasn't my time. So I think even at an early age, the distinction between play time, creative time, and then the structural time that society demands of you was certainly what I can remember.
Interesting. I love that. And how has your relationship with time evolved over the years?
I remember being in my 20s and I remember having this sense there was never enough time. I can vividly remember these sort of times, it just feels like there's not enough time. And I really found that odd, and I didn't understand it because I wasn't developed as a human enough at that point. You think you're in your 20s, you're really developed. You're not. Psychological maturity takes ages, and that's fine. But I remember being really confused by that quality and quite unnerved by it, the sort of sense that I wasn't at peace. And I think it's one of the driving forces that's led me on this very deep quest of how we, the human, functions. And that quest takes me in many places, and I'm happy to tell you where. But yeah, that sense of sort of 20s, it was very different from childhood. There was a lot more demand, expectation, but perhaps bringing it towards today. So I'm north of 50 now, which sounds ridiculous when I say it to myself, but time now is a different thing. My relationship with time is different because my relationship with my mind is different. I remember reading Martin Heidegger's term, which I don't know if you come across, but he was an existential thinker. And he said that we are time. Humans, we are time. And when you think about that concept that you are time, when you're alive, time is time. When you're no longer here, there is no time. And I remember really imbuing this deep level concept around, look, you are time itself, rather than the abstraction of looking at the clock, which happens, it's human life. But really tuning into the quality of being time was something I've been playing with in the last later years. And it comes and goes. Sometimes I'm really with it and other times less so. But that's where I would say my relationship with time has got to.
Talk to us about this journey to the work that it is that you do today.
When people say coach, it's a very broad term. It doesn't really mean that much. But essentially, I help people see and understand themselves in a completely different manner. I help them see how they think, what they do, their mental structure, their story, their beliefs, their behaviors, and then how that plays out in their life and their work and their business and the world. What I often refer to as the inner architecture of being. If you think of a building, you might reconstruct the building and to redesign it. How our inner architecture is what I work with, because everything is predicated on mind. What our thoughts are, our experiences. And I've got here through a long, convoluted journey through psychotherapeutic training, a lot of coaching training, psychology training, reading around fields of things from systems theory to embodied cognition to lots of current edge thinking. But I've had a lot of old pedigree in the Eastern arts. So I'm a yoga teacher, was a yoga teacher for nearly a decade. I've studied a lot of Advaita Vedanta, which is non-duality. I've also studied some of the ancient Greeks. And when you look at how we are in a meta, big thinking level, life is a lot more fascinating and curious than the busy day-to-day business person. So my journey has always come from, I want to know, I'm interested, I'm curious. I'm basically like that kid, the annoying kid is like, why does that happen? I haven't really changed. But curiosity is an immense power for opening up understanding. The shadow side of it is like, you're always wanting more. You always want to learn more and understand more. It's like, you're never quite done. But that's also the energy driving that quest to learn. And quest, of course, is the main piece of a question. It is to quest. So that is a very sort of potted version of how I've got to do what I do today.
And it was the late Steve Jobs who said that we can only join up the dots by looking back. So if you were to now look back at the dots that have got you to here today, can you clearly identify any of them that were perhaps pivot points on the journey?
When I was really young, I was, like I said to you, this child who was very imaginative and playful. And I remember watching Star Wars. Star Wars was around when I was a child, and they had this, all the spaceship stuff. But they had this concept of the Jedi and the Force, which really is taken from a blend of yogis and Shaolin monks and Tao. And that's where it really probably is taken from. But as a kid, I wasn't available to that knowledge. But I did have a film and a reference point, like an archetypal reference, that there's this energy force and there's this bigger than just us single human beings. And it always intrigued me. So I was very interested in that quest of the grand, how do things operate rather than the material. I was very interested in the energetic, spiritual side of things. And so that's point number one, was being a kid and just being interested in that stuff and not really seeing other people being interested in. I would say then I really shifted when I got to 40, in the late 30s, when I trained to be a yoga teacher. And that was a really awakening state for me. And that changed everything. I had a photography career, super successful, was doing really well with that, but I got empty by the end of it and I was done. So I retired from the business and I took up a yoga teaching practice. But that was a big, big pivot point for me. Learning yoga and being embodied, because that's a sense of time. When you're in your body, it's an experience that is different than conceptual time. That's a very different point. I must say that that's probably infused by years of studying philosophy, because it's sort of orientating myself slowly into this awakening. And then learning psychotherapy and training in that, and then into the arts of the mind. These sort of stepping stones of evolution have happened slowly, then quickly.
What do you think informed this interest in how the mind works? Can you pinpoint it, or was it just something that was naturally within you, this curiosity you're describing?
The curiosity was always there, but I think it's in the later years, so north of 40. I remember having a crisis of meaning, what one might call an existential crisis or an awakening. It depends on how you deal with it, is how you term it. But really just a version of the identity falling away. And that old identity was, I want to be successful. I was a successful photographer, plenty of money coming in, and it was meaningless. And what made a depth of meaning to me was to go on this quest, to further the knowledge of philosophy and from yoga, and to actually be deeply present. Because being deeply present, you're absolutely in time. There is only that moment. As of course a lot of the Eastern arts teach. So when you're doing a yoga practice or any embodiment practice, if you are fully there, you're fully with time. You are with it. There is no other time. There is only that time. And I think that's a really pivot point for this sort of expansion of who I am now in 10, 12 years on, to have gone into these multiple fields of connectivity to understand how we function.
You are time. That is fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you've learned from living so far outside of the comfort zone. And perhaps for anybody who is considering taking a different path in their life, what words of comfort can you give them as they are stepping into the world of discomfort?
Yes. It all works out, strangely. There are no wrong decisions. There are only decisions with certain consequences. And I had a career in advertising in my 20s, and it was a very prestigious career. It was very cool at the time. And I remember the agency I worked with, it disbanded. They had an issue and they had to break up the company. And I remember leaving that place thinking, so annoying. I meant to leave years before this. And I remember reflecting on the fact that it was too easy to stay with the expense account and the car and the money. It was too easy to stay safe, stay with what you know. It was way more risky to jump and say, I'm done with this, I want to do something different. So my hand was forced, but the lesson was learned. And what I would say is that what we fear is the unknown, and yet the unknown is where all the new things are available. I think there's a relationship to the discomfort. If we get closer to it at a pace that works for each of us, that's where the new things are. That's where the good stuff is.
And was it the age that was the trigger for considering seeing life a different way, do you think? Or did something else actually happen that you'd like to share?
I don't know if it's the age or something happened. It's sort of more of an evolution. It's more of an innate feeling for me. So when I was in photography and then got to the end of that and chose to completely change my working life and my whole attitude to life, there was this sense of emptiness. It was very palpable, it's very embodied. It's like I literally feel empty. And in my head, conceptually, like, well, you're doing really well. You got a waiting list. But the concept and the experience didn't fit. There was a dissonance there. There was a big divergence of how I felt. And I think it was the innate feeling which drove this later decision to really go on that quest of evolution. I have an autoimmune condition, which is something which I've lived with since I was 13 years old. And that's born off a traumatic experience when I was younger, being a difficult time at school. And I've had to manage how my body responds to stress. And it's curious, anytime I'm under emotional stress, this can flare, as they say. And when I'm much more in a flow state, an accepting state, then things will abate. So I've had to be with these innate changes of my physiology. And in later years, I've got better at working with them as opposed to trying to dial them out.
I'm sure there's somebody who's listening to this, and I can certainly resonate with that empty feeling that you're describing. However, I, and perhaps the listeners who are hearing you describe this as well, was unable to find a next step or an answer. And it was only my near-death experience which really set me on the path and almost gave me permission in many ways to find a different way of looking at life and a different way of seeing things, create a new perspective, new reality. What was it that you were able to call upon within yourself to help you to even take this next step?
It's an interesting thing, Abigail. I see it with a lot of my coaching clients, and I think it's an innate human thing, certainly us Westerners, that we have to be in enough pain to move. The pain of staying needs to be greater than the pain of leaving, whether that's a relationship, whether it's a job, whether it's a mindset, but we get to this point and we're like, I'm done. So what I would say, listen to the discomfort, because the discomfort is information. Separate the signal from the noise. What is that innate feeling if I'm stuck in a job or my business isn't going where I want to, or whatever the environmental factors are? Try to get in tune with that discomfort, because it's far better to make an early jump. It's already the signal, it's just getting louder. But we're ready when we're ready. And I think there's something around, rather than trying to force the issue, it's like be present to the issue. And what I've learned in more recent years is try not to control everything. I was of the ilk of control and organize and fix, and there's so much suffering in that. It really is. But there's a difference between ownership and deliberation and commitment. So you can be all in on something and detached, or you can be too invested and so attached that if things don't work out as you want to, you don't work out as it wants to. So I have learned that detachment has been the pervading mindset to bring to stuff, and curiosity, it always is there. But detachment has given me a healthy bit of space. Things may not work out, but as I think you said, certainly when you were a guest on my podcast, you're still breathing. You still have choices. And if you're still breathing and have choices, human beings are very clever. We're very, very adaptable. But are you awake to the signal? So I think that's my understanding of it, is listen to those signals, and then also what's in the way. Yeah. And for most of us, it's fear, but fear doesn't just stop. That's an emotion, but fear of. And even people say fear of change, that's not good enough for me, because it doesn't mean anything. So if it's fear of, I don't know, not knowing what I'm doing, then the closer you go to not knowing what I'm doing, then it's not this horrible, scary thing. It becomes understood. Those are the elements that have happened for me, which I would invite others to think about. If that's going on for you, what can you learn from it? How can you work with it?
Thank you so much for sharing all of this, Sal. I am joining up the dots in my head of previous guests that we have had on the podcast who have also mentioned this word yoga in their journeys. I'd just love to unpack this with you a little bit more. You are feeling empty with the career that you have, and then you come across yoga and train as a yoga teacher. How did yoga come into your life experience?
It's a very interesting one. So for 6 or 7 years before that, I'd been studying philosophy, which is based largely on Indian philosophy. So one would call that yoga of the mind. That's what they call it. I think Jnana yoga. But I hadn't really seen it, and because they infused other stuff as well, other sort of philosophies. But we'd been sort of studying the mental side of it for a long time. And it was a girlfriend at the time invited me to come to a yoga class with her. Now, obviously being a bloke, generally blokes didn't go to yoga classes then, or not so much. But I'd really hurt my back doing an exercise class, and like a lot of people, had heard about yoga, was kind of curious what this weird thing was. And then, of course, someone gave me a practical in, which was it can help your back pain. And there was the bridge between my naivety and my fear and the opportunity to try it. So my bridge was, oh, okay, I'll go because it's apparently good for back pain. And I went. And I remember going to this class and did the class, came out, and my girlfriend at the time said, what did you think? I was like, it's awful. I absolutely hated it. It's like, it's so awkward and uncomfortable. What are these weird positions? I don't get it. But I'm someone who doesn't, I'm not someone who's going to jump at the first off. So I thought, well, let's just go for 6 weeks, because if it does good for your back, let's give it some time. And each time I went back, being uncomfortable, the only guy in there, I think at the time, or one of the only men, couldn't do even a down dog to save my life. Something happened. I was getting an experiential shift of feeling. And that was a reference point. That became like, I actually feel calm after this class. I feel a bit different, or my back felt a bit looser. And then it had this layering effect by going back each week. And of course, as you learn about the thing you don't know, it starts becoming imbued. So the posture work, the breathing practice, the sequences, and then suddenly it goes from not knowing to knowing. And the funny thing is the start was a bit like how, there's no way I would have ever even thought I'd be a yoga teacher. So it shows you how little our precognition might be on that. And then at a later point, someone was talking about doing it, and it's like, yeah, that sounds a great idea. I'll join a teacher training program. And then the rest was really history. I flew through the program. I loved the learning, at an older age. I found it easy. That's not to be arrogant anyway. I just generally understood it. It's like, oh, this makes sense to me, from the body to the esoteric. And then the gift of teaching people was very, very special, and is a very cherished chapter of my life for many reasons.
Sal, I am laughing internally and smiling as I'm hearing you say this, as I think back to myself and previous guests. We enter that yoga studio thinking it's an exercise class that's going to improve our back pain. And then, lo and behold, we are on a whole nother journey. Now, I have not got to the stage of training to become a yoga teacher, although I am considering doing yoga teacher training only to enhance my own personal practice, which whenever I say this to a yoga teacher, they laugh and say, okay. Let's look at how this is connected to the work that you're doing today, human performance. We have spoken in the past, and you've said that there's a question that you love to ask your clients, and that is, why do you want to be more productive? Tell us a little bit more about what usually happens when you're working with a client, you're having this conversation, and the next steps.
The first step is to understand the mind of the client, and for them to understand their own mind as well. Like, why do we do what we do? Meta thinking about thinking. And, it's funny because it actually ties into yoga, because the real job of a yoga teacher, I remember Sadhguru, the famous living guru, talks about this, and in his beautiful way he says the only job of a yoga teacher is to wake people up. That's the real job. Everything else is just the tools and the techniques to do that process. It's an awakening process, and it never left me, and I've had great teachers along the way who have sort of imbued many of those messages. So in fact, the coaching process I do is an awakening process, awakening to your patterns, your beliefs, your structures, your fears, your shadow sides, your greatness, because a lot of us just don't have the ability to, we can't experience ourselves. No one can. Only others experience us. So a coach becomes a mirror, and one that holds you without judgment and just compassion, says, hey, this is how you're operating, but then can become a guide. So if someone wants to grow a business or change or evolve who they are, then we can add in elegant understanding from how the system of the mind works, how behavior works, the impact of the language and the stories we tell ourselves. All of that can then evolve into being who you really want to be, and perhaps who you're really born to be. And I know this is big into your space, but going off the conceptual, like who I should be, which is an imposition by external forces, to being who I feel I am to be. which is an autonomous state. And you can grow a business and you can do all sorts of wonderful things in the world. But if you're doing from being, it's a very wholesome place. If you're doing from someone else's imposition, you're not in control, or you're not at choice, which I think is a really disempowering state. So while it can sound a bit esoteric and multi-layer, essentially it's helping people awaken to all their aspects, helping them transcend the fears, transcend the old stories, and to be really intentional about what and how they're doing in life.
I love this. And if you are loving it too, you'll definitely have to check out the episode that Sal and I recorded for his podcast, where we really deep dived a little bit further into this concept of becoming. So, Sal, am I hearing you say that as the client recognizes who they are through the processes that you take them on, then they are able to then lead their business, lead their life, lead their relationships as that version of themselves that they want to be?
Yes. One of the biggest things is to get out of our own way. And the first thing we need to do is look at our own stories and our patterns. Because if we look at the stories and the patterns that we're telling ourselves, they're built on the past. And if we were to use a bit of brain science, the brain has schemas, which are basically complex maps for everything in life. And those complex maps are what we sort of lean into, and then we come from, and then we operate. And the problem with those maps is they're based on past data. So we're essentially repeating the past self being repeated with the patterns and so forth.
Can you give us some examples from the clients that you've worked with when it comes to the human performance and productivity?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. I'll keep their identity private for confidentiality. But I was working with this person and they came to me through a referral, which is pretty much all clients. And they were deciding, should they go and stay in the corporate space or should they go into entrepreneurship? And there was this dichotomy and they couldn't solve the problem. They couldn't decide. And it wasn't really about entrepreneurship or corporate at the time. What I saw was about how they did deciding. How did that person do decision making? And the meta processes around that, how they think, how they act, the consequences, and all the structural inner stuff. So we did some work on that, and that's where we got to help that person unpack and think, and who are they now at this junction in their life? Not who they think they are, who they are. And then so moving out from the concept. So we did a lot of inner work and helped the person understand themselves a bit better. But then came the execution. It was like, you need to choose. And as a coach, I'm as lovely as they come, but I'm rock solid. It's like, you need to make a choice. It's one or the other. You've got to go all in, because it felt to me the right thing to invite this person to go, because they weren't able to do it. So then they went away and they made their own decision. So I don't make decisions for people, but I give them context to help them. And they went to entrepreneurship. And what's really fascinating is over a long period of time I've been coaching them, they've gone from, they stopped drinking alcohol. They used to drink quite a lot, and they stopped that completely. They've gone from working like 80, 90 hours a week to a much more sensible amount of work. They started running. They've run 4 marathons since I've been coaching them. And they've got a business that's gone from 0 and a startup to, I think they're at 10 people now, and they are looking for a very large sale in the next 3 to 5 years, and the value of the company is in the millions. And it's such a beautiful thing about seeing how when you work with our mind and the beliefs and the stories and the old narratives, and how you can then be intentional and courageous and understand your, what you can call in coaching, your zone of genius. Where are you brilliant and where are you blocked? So if we can beef up the genius, like really let that come to the fore, remove the blocks in the way, everything just flows. Everything flows. And then behavior is always a consequence of all of that process. So that's why behavior is the last point of call. That's why I'm interested in behavior after we do the thinking and shift on the inside. So there's one example of how when we do that deep human performance work, it has direct effect in the manifest world.
And what would that deep human performance work look like? Would it be conversations? Would it be questions? Would it be homework for the person who is thinking, what do I do next?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very abstract field. So largely it's through conversation, so with another person, and in the art of using language and questions. Questions are vehicles of attention. They take you to places in your mind or where you have or haven't been. So we use a lot of power of questions and language. What I'm listening to also is for what's not being said. I'm listening to subtext, I'm listening to tonality, I'm getting a limbic resonance, so my limbic brain resonates with theirs, and there'll be a resonant feel about something, about what's going on. And there's an embodied quality. So in that process is allowing that to come out and be experienced. And I think I said earlier, holding up the mirror. So we can't experience ourselves. We can't hear the language patterns we use that keep us entrenched in old patterns. Another example, I work with a guy in the finance sector, and we're working to shift in his field, and he was iffing a lot. Didn't know it, But there was a lot of if this and if that and it was a language pattern being repeated. But it was telling me he was in a place of bargaining with the future rather than committing to it. So when we unpack that pattern, there was no ifing left. It was like, what is going to happen and what isn't? And being very deliberate made the person commit, and then it made it real, and then it gave him the change he needed. Because if was a bargaining tool to stay safe, to not make the decision, not have the unknown outcome. So we need to elegantly deconstruct it and then allow that to reconstruct, which was a very nice experience.
That is so, so powerful. Let's talk a little bit more about those language patterns for a second, because one that I come across quite often is I know that. I'm not sure if that's one that you experience when it comes to time management and productivity. And we are talking about, you could try this, you could do that. What about this? What about that? Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I've read that. Is that something that you experience? And what's your response to a client who is expressing that language pattern?
Such an interesting pattern, isn't it? I know that. So I know that implicitly says that they have a conceptual understanding. Like, I know what to do. I know what to do, Abigail. Thanks, that's a great idea. But if they're not doing it, there's a disconnect. So if you know about time management or about strategy or about growth or challenging yourself, but you're not doing it, it's an abstraction. It's just a load of, in the simplest term, it's wishful thinking. It's just, it'd be nice. It's a simple conceptual world that I often talk about spinning on a loop, because if you know that but you're not doing it, there's a disconnect. So how can it be embodied? How can it become a real thing where you are managing your time or growing your business or doing a challenge that really pushes you? And this is the interesting space about when I work with the body. So that's my yoga pedigree. I'm also trained in strength and conditioning just because I happen to do a lot of it myself and love it. And that whole field of embodiment, like how can it be tangibly, experientially done? That changes everything. So when someone says I know it, they're saying I've got it conceptually. They are not saying I've got it experientially. Bring the two together, concept and experience, and then you have a wholeness to that experience. And then they can actually enact it.
Is what I'm hearing you say that it's a journey of becoming, but the client has to want to go on that journey of becoming. So integrating what they know within their own actual body, framework, actions, life. One of the ways that I see this is it's like going to the gym. I know how to get a six pack, but going to the gym is how you get the six pack, not knowing how to get there.
Yeah. yeah. So you got to know what to do, but you have to do it. So it's a whole experience. You got to know what to do at the gym to get your six pack or do your exercise training, and you have to go and do it. It has to be a live embodied experience. If it's in conceptual only, it's a spinning on a loop. Thinking about any change work at all is great, but you have to do something. And the doing makes it manifest. When we think about something and have a concept and understanding, and we have an experience and we actually physically do it, it becomes a reality. And that's, I think, a very important distinction. So if we're just stuck in thought loops, I'd like to, I'd love to, I want to, I know, we haven't grounded into I am, I will, I can, and I do. And that embodied process, the physical doing of, changes everything.
And so the client comes to you and they say, Sal, I would like to have this kind of life. I want to consider X, Y, Z, but I just don't have time. How would you handle that?
God, that's a great question, isn't it? I just don't have time. I would just challenge it straight away. And you do have time. You're just making different choices. You have a hierarchy that isn't serving you. So do you want to look at that hierarchy, or do you want to, do you want to change? Do you really want to change? Because if you do, we can work. If you don't, then I can't help you, because you have to make the choice. You said it in our podcast about you got to choose to be on the boat of possibility, I think it was. So that's a really important one.
It is possible for you, but you have to want to actually do it.
Absolutely. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have choice. If you don't have choice, you're not invested, not committed. So if you go to a coach or healer or any person who can help you develop, and you are going because someone told you, it probably won't work. You've got to commit. Commitment is life. If you are committed, you are living. And if you're living, you're with time, which is, of course, your speciality. So if we're not committed, we're not really there. We're not with the change, and nothing's going to change. And that's okay. If that's your thing, we don't need to shame it or give it. But know what's happening. And I think that's an important thing. Hold it with grace, that if you don't want to change, that's fine. But if you do want to change, then you have to do something different. And that's such an important thing. You have to make your own choices. And one thing I demand of all my clients is commitment. Like, you've got to commit. Otherwise, this just won't work. And it's part of my contracting that you've got to commit to yourself to change. Because if you really want this, we can get it. But you've got to commit.
So if change is possible and somebody isn't experiencing the change, are they the common denominator?
Largely, there are environmental factors. There are reasons why things are happening. Of course there are. And we don't want to get caught up in the it's all you. But there's a large part of how you deal with challenges, being resourceful, who do you reach out to, what do you do, as well as the environmental factors. Maybe you need some staff or some money or some investment, and that's fine. But how you think about it is your autonomy. And if you work there, it's the space you can have so much more power and influence over than trying to change the external forces without changing yourself. That's what I see.
That is so empowering to hear. So there is always a possibility, an option and a reframe. And there are people who are available to help you and support you if that's the situation that you find yourself within. Because we don't all have the same circumstances in life, and we certainly don't all live in the same positions in the world either. Tell us what you've got coming up over the next 6 months.
In the near future, I have some amazing clients I work with, and my focus is on change makers where I can. So people who are making a difference in the world, who do work that has an exponential influence. So somebody who's helping others shift and grow. I'm one of the coaches that coach those sorts of people. I love that kind of work. For me personally, it's another stage of growth, just personal growth. It's going into self. I have my own coaching process that I do, because if I'm not modeling what I do, then it feels disingenuous. For me, it's about stepping into something, another level. It feels like another sort of existential shift for me. Quite hard to articulate what that is in description, but it feels like I'm ready for another shift. And on some levels, it's a spiritual dimension. It's like understanding and tapping into the Tao or the energy forces, which we, quantum zero field, whatever you want to call it, and really letting that be a guide, as opposed to, because I can be very conceptual as well. I can be in my head. That's why I do the work I do. To like be embodied. So for me, it's like, going another level, and can I let that in? And I think in your terms, the intuitive quality, can that lead me even better? So I would say that's my near future of what I'm endeavoring to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's really exciting, and is also feeding into the answers that are coming from other guests who are on the podcast. It certainly feels like we're all in a great big chapter of change right now on the planet, whether we like it or not. Sal, tell us something that you do with your time on a daily basis that you think that most people don't.
Prioritize. And I prioritize with what I believe is important. I have one morning a week I open for my coaching clients, just one. Every other morning is mine, and I'm at the gym, in the pool, maybe I'm by the sea with the dogs, something like that. But I am physical, and I'm in my body, and I'm in that space of just being utterly present. So I do lots of different types of training. I love strength training and that kind of domain now. I do a little bit of yoga, but I've gone more into the strength stuff. I'm just going to caveat that. You can do strength training with a yoga attitude. Fully present, fully embodied with the breath. It's just a different tool. So it is different, and yet the qualities can remain. So that's how I prioritize body, health, and self. That comes first. And then after that, then how do I manage my day? I block it. I work in 90-minute cycles. My coaching is 90-minute sessions. The brain works in 90-minute circadian patterns, and I think you know this. And I have essentially 4 blocks a day. And I try as best as I can to keep that really boundaried and work through those blocks. But that's how I shape my day. And being present, use the breath. Yeah, so I've done breathwork training. Be with the breath every moment. 20,000 breaths a day, we're always taking them. So can you use the breath to be present, whether you're in a podcast or a coaching session or at the gym or simply traveling somewhere? Can I be with that? Because us humans, we can always be in the future, mine in the future. So that's how I endeavor to organize things. And it's daily practice. It's daily practice. You've got to do every day. Otherwise, it's just another concept.
As we're wrapping up this conversation today, what's one question you haven't been asked that you'd like to have been?
Why do I really do what I do? And my answer to that is to be one small piece of worldview change. And I've been privileged to be party to knowledge by incredible thinkers in the world, from Fritjof Capra to Gregory Bateson, big systems thinkers, to yoga masters and gurus, and all sorts of wonderful people. And their knowledge is, no one owns knowledge, it's just shared energy. And I've been lucky enough to absorb some of that shared energy and see that our worldview predicates everything. So how we see the world is how we treat each other, the environment, our future, all these things. And if we can expand that into a more connected way, it feels a bit of a mission to be part of that conversation, part of that gentle shift that I trust many of us are waking up to.
And what words of wisdom would you like to leave us with?
Don't take it all too seriously. Because sometimes I catch myself and I can take myself way too seriously. And when you laugh and chuckle at life a little bit, it eases things. And it's not that things aren't serious. I don't mean to denigrate anything, but when we are at ease, things flow a lot easier. So I know when I'm like, Mr. Productive, lots on like, just, it's okay. You're human. This is how it goes. Be with it. So yeah, a little not too serious sometimes for myself.
And if you could go back on your timeline and take one thing out, would you want to? And if you would, what would that be?
That's a deeply philosophical conundrum, isn't it? Because if you take one thing out, you change who you are today. We cannot be the person today without all of the experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, that we've had. I like where I'm at, and I like where I'm going, and I'm curious to learn more. So I'm not going to destabilize the past. The only thing I would say is how I relate to the past is the one thing I've done the work on, and I've done it in therapeutic context. How I relate to difficulty and pain and the challenges I've had to overcome in my own experience. My relationship to the past is what I have actually worked on and changed, as opposed to the details of it. Now, I know that might be a slight sidestep and abstraction from what we said there, but it came to mind.
That's fantastic. Tell us more.
So if you have a difficult experience in, say, youth, we could want that to go away. Difficult time, wish that didn't happen. Of course, understandable, but we can't. So can we relate to it differently from our present, how our memory reconstructs in the moment? Can we have a different relationship to a difficult event? So not to make it nice or positive thinking, just how do I relate to it? Do I have magnanimousness, or do I have grace? Do I have an understanding that even if it was difficult, it's allowed me to learn? And the relationship to previous events is the one thing we can control, because the relationship happens from the present moment.
Sal Jefferies, thank you so much for your time. This conversation has been absolutely amazing.
You're very welcome. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you, Abigail. I really appreciate you inviting me to come and join you.
And as always, please let us know what you are taking away from these episodes. If there are questions that you have for Sal, if you would like him back on the podcast to talk about more and explore any of the concepts that he has started on this episode with us today, then I am sure we can negotiate some more time in his very busy diary. And until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay well, and it is your time. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you loved what you heard, be sure to let me know by leaving a review so I can keep the good stuff coming. Come and say hi on Instagram at Success by Design Training, or visit my website successbydesigntraining.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Abigail Barnes. Until next time, don't forget, you are amazing, and it's your time.